"You're going to need to take it down, Mr. Mercer. It's a liability." Karen Wilcox's voice was smooth, practiced, like she'd said this 100 times and expected no resistance. She stood at the base of my treehouse, clipboard in one hand, sunglasses shielding whatever flickered behind her smile. Her tone was pure HOA, detached authority disguised as civility. "That structure's been flagged by the board, unapproved elevation, visible from the street. It's a violation." I stepped beside her, slow and silent. Then I said, without raising my voice, "I designed military-grade staging platforms. That thing's got better anchoring than your house." She flinched. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I didn't build that treehouse for curb appeal. I built it because my son needed a reason to come outside again after cancer took his mom. And I needed a reason to believe this place could still be home. It's not just plywood and nails. It's the last thing she and I sketched together on a napkin 2 weeks before her last chemo. Karen didn't care. She only saw it as an unauthorized structure. I looked up at the beams I'd triple-bolted into a live oak we'd saved from the last developer's plan. She never even noticed the details: recessed fasteners, eco-treated materials, the pull rope access ladder Noah insisted on keeping. All she saw was "not approved." She tapped her clipboard like she was sealing a casket. "You'll be fined daily until it's removed." I didn't blink. "Then I guess you'll be billing my attorney," she snorted, turning like it was already over. But I wasn't just some grieving homeowner. I was a licensed structural engineer with a specialty in residential code compliance, and I'd fought tougher bureaucracies than her board. My name's Ethan Mercer. I moved into Laurel Grove Estates 6 years ago, back when the HOA was a sleepy afterthought and neighbors still helped each other out. That changed when Karen took over. She started small, flagging holiday lights, mandating mailbox uniformity, sending citations for things like discolored fence panels or excessive flag display. Most folks grumbled, paid the fines, moved on. I didn't, not this time. Because this time, she came after something sacred. See, my son Noah filmed her the week before. She thought no one saw her lean over our back fence, phone in hand, snapping pictures. She thought it was just a quick peek. What she didn't know was that he'd hit record, and that it captured her stepping into our yard while we weren't home. I hadn't told anyone yet, not even Noah, but something inside me clicked the moment I saw her scuff the tree roots with her boot, like she had a right to be there. She didn't. I waited until she got halfway down the block, her clipboard swinging like a badge of power. I could see her heading to her next target, probably old Mrs. Farnsworth and her rogue wind chimes. I turned back to the treehouse. The late afternoon sun hit the beams just right, casting a soft shadow over the porch swing I still hadn't taken down. The same swing Sarah used to rock in while reading aloud to Noah when he was too sick to climb trees himself. That's when I knew this wasn't about compliance. This was about control. And if she wanted a fight, she'd just pick the wrong damn blueprint to challenge. Where are you watching from? Because what just happened in my backyard wasn't the end. It was the opening shot. And Karen Wilcox had no idea the lengths I'd go to make sure that treehouse stayed exactly where it was. Right now, she thinks it's just a structure. She's about to learn it's a symbol. By the time Karen disappeared behind her gate, the air still felt scorched from her visit. But it wasn't just me. Laurel Grove had been simmering under her rule for months. Years, if you ask the right people. That night, I walked through the neighborhood with a clipboard of my own. Not for retaliation, not yet. I was gathering proof of a pattern. You'd be surprised what people are willing to admit when you knock on their door and just ask. First stop, Mr. Patel, 2 houses down. His mailbox had been fine for years until Karen decided the font on the street number violated visual uniformity. She fined him $50, then another $50 when he didn't repaint fast enough. "I thought she was just being thorough," he told me, rubbing the back of his neck. "But now I wonder..." 2 doors past that, the Langleys had a rusted garden gnome on their porch. They got hit with a citation for obstruction of walkway visibility. The thing was tucked in a flower bed. It didn't obstruct anything. They didn't fight it. Most don't. I kept a quiet tally in my notebook. 7 citations in the past 3 weeks, all from Karen, none from any other board member, all unapproved by vote, according to whispers. but none of that had crossed the line the way her trespassing did. The next morning, I took Noah to the community garden before school. It was our ritual, watering the tomato patch Sarah started the year we moved in. That space had its own rhythm. Bees hovered like tiny engineers. Sprinklers clicked with a soft, mechanical breath. And for a few minutes, we could forget the weight pressing in from the rest of the block. But even there, Karen's fingerprints were showing. "They banned compost barrels last month," said Joelle, one of the other regulars. She handed me a watering can. "Karen said it attracted pests. She's trying to phase out sunflowers now, said they're visually aggressive." "Visually aggressive?" Joelle raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm making that up?" I didn't. Not anymore. By the time we left the garden, I had 3 more stories and a pattern emerging. Small, petty. Controls passed off as policy, none of them formally documented or voted on by the board, and everyone talked the same way. Careful, glancing over their shoulder, like they were afraid to say the wrong thing on the wrong patch of grass. I used to believe HOAs were just annoying background noise, a few rules for neighborhood order. But this was different. This was a chokehold. Later that evening, I drove to the local recreation center, not to meet anyone, just to think. It was one of the only places left in the area not under HOA jurisdiction. I sat near the basketball courts and watched a group of kids shoot hoops under flickering lights, laughter echoing against the pavement. And that's when it hit me. Karen didn't just rule through fines, she ruled through silence. She picked people off one by one, isolated them, embarrassed them, made examples out of them until no one else dared resist. That's why the Langleys didn't fight, why Mr. Patel repainted twice, why Joelle was afraid to plant sunflowers. That's how she kept control. But control only works until someone breaks the pattern. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. When I got home, Noah was curled up on the couch, watching something on his tablet. I sat beside him and glanced over. It was the video, the one he recorded of Karen stepping onto our property. He hadn't told me he saved it on his cloud backup too. Smart kid. I didn't say anything. I just leaned back, watching the footage again. The way she scanned the backyard, how she touched the tree without permission, the smirk on her face. That wasn't curiosity, that was ownership. And I knew, no matter how many rules she twisted or how many neighbors she intimidated, this wasn't just her neighborhood to command. Not anymore. Because now I had the pattern, and soon I'd have the ally. Karen Wilcox thought she was the board. She was about to meet the resistance. The first time I saw Natalie James hesitate, it wasn't during a vote or a heated meeting. It was something much smaller. She was standing by the HOA mailbox kiosk that morning, keys in hand, pretending to check her box. But her eyes weren't on the mail. They were on Karen, who was across the street snapping photos of someone's garden flags. Natalie's fingers froze over the lock, not turning it, just holding. I watched from the sidewalk, letting the quiet fill the space. Natalie noticed me, but didn't smile, just gave the faintest nod, like a reflex, before dropping her hand and walking off, no mail in hand. Most folks wouldn't have clocked it. But I used to review structural failures for insurance firms. Learning to see where tension hides is part of the job. And Natalie looked like she was ready to buckle. That evening after dinner, I sat out on the front steps with Noah. He didn't say much, just stared at the treehouse with his hoodie pulled up, knees hugged to his chest. I knew that look. "You still have the video?" I asked. He gave a small nod. "You okay?" He shrugged. "I didn't mean to get anyone in trouble. I saw her climbing up the side and it felt wrong." "You were right to record it." He bit his lip. "Is she going to tear it down?" I looked up at the structure, every beam sealed, every angle accounted for. "Not if I have anything to say about it." He sat with that a while, then whispered, "It's the only place that still smells like her shampoo." That one punched a hole through me. Karen wasn't just threatening a structure, she was trying to erase the one piece of our home Sarah had touched with joy, and that wasn't going to happen. The next day I spotted Natalie again, this time at the community pool. She wasn't swimming, just standing off to the side near the equipment shed, clipboard in hand, lips pressed tight. I made my way over slowly, keeping my voice low. "Is it your job to monitor pool floaties now too?" She startled, then forced a laugh. "Karen's on a visibility streak." I nodded, leaning against the fence. Saw you yesterday. You looked like you wanted to say something. She froze. Natalie, I'm not here to make trouble, but I saw the way you looked at her. Silence. Then, just above a whisper, she said the board approved it. The demolition order for your treehouse. She lied? Natalie's throat tightened. She didn't answer directly, just said, she doesn't always wait for votes. And the rest of the board? They're scared, or tired, or just don't care anymore. And you? She closed her eyes for a second too long. I thought I could help from the inside, but now I just sit through her motions and sign what's already been decided. There it was, cracked open like a fault line. I didn't push, just stood there, letting the chlorine in the air sting my nose and the sound of splashing kids fill the space between us. Finally, I said, I have a recording of her trespassing. I haven't used it yet. Natalie turned slowly. That's serious. It is, and it's only the beginning. She bit her thumbnail, looking back toward the clubhouse. If I were to say something off the record, it wouldn't matter. She's got the board wrapped around her. Maybe, or maybe they just need someone to show them how tight the leash is. She glanced back at me. You think you can undo this? I know how systems fail, Natalie, not with explosions, with pressure. She didn't answer, but as she turned to leave, I caught it, her hand tightening around her clipboard, knuckles white. There was a crack in the wall now, not wide enough to break through, but enough to shine light through. Back at home, I found Noah asleep in the treehouse with his hoodie pulled over his eyes and Sarah's old travel blanket wrapped around him. I stood at the base of the oak, not calling up, just letting the moment hold. We weren't just fighting for property. We were fighting for memory. And now, someone on the inside was listening. If you've ever watched someone stay silent when they knew something was wrong, you know how much it matters when they finally choose to speak. Natalie hasn't stepped forward yet, but the cracks are showing. Drop a comment if you've ever seen someone break from the inside first, and hit subscribe to see how this quiet ally might just turn the tide. 2 mornings later, the letter came. Certified mail. HOA logo printed right at the top, bold and officious. Final notice, unauthorized elevated structure. Violation. Non-compliance subject to daily fines plus forced removal. They really liked their caps lock. I set the envelope on the kitchen counter without opening it. The contents didn't matter. I already knew what it said. Karen was doubling down. This wasn't about policy anymore. It was about pride. She'd made a threat, I hadn't bowed, and now she needed to prove she wasn't bluffing. The funny thing about people like her, they don't realize how much damage they do until the pushback comes from someone who isn't afraid to look them in the eye. I walked out to the driveway and stood with my coffee, watching her make her morning rounds. Clipboard, sunglasses, phone in hand. She always walked fast like she was late to something official, like her presence alone made things legitimate. But today, I wasn't the only one watching. 3 houses down, Mrs. Ruiz paused mid-sweep on her porch and gave me a knowing look. Mr. Patel stood by his mailbox a little longer than necessary, pretending to sort junk mail. Even Raj, the quiet man who never spoke above a whisper, stepped out to adjust his potted basil with a deliberate slowness that suggested he wanted to be seen. The neighborhood wasn't asleep anymore. Karen turned the corner, didn't glance at any of us, probably still convinced this was a one-man rebellion. She hadn't felt the shift yet. By noon, the follow-up email hit my inbox, this time with photos attached, angles of the treehouse taken from outside our yard. No dates, no context. Just poorly framed shots and a line at the bottom that said, "Structure must be removed by Friday or face legal enforcement." I stared at that word, enforcement, for a long time. Then I opened the folder where Noah had saved the footage. She didn't know what he'd captured. She didn't realize she'd been recorded stepping over the property line, leaning against the trunk, pulling out a tape measure, muttering about trimming that branch back anyway. She hadn't seen the lens. But I had, and I'd copied it to 3 drives, 2 clouds, and emailed it to myself from a dummy account. What Karen had was a photo war. What I had was evidence. Still, I wasn't going to use it yet, not until I had what I needed from Natalie. That night, I stepped out to the side yard. The HOA meeting was coming up in 4 days. Plenty of time. If I could get a confirmation from someone on the board that Karen was acting solo. I paced the grass behind the house, hands in my jacket pockets, wind sharp in my ears. The oak tree rustled quietly behind me, the treehouse shadowed in moonlight. It didn't just look sturdy, it looked permanent. Noah stepped out onto the treehouse platform above me. "You're still up? Couldn't sleep?" He leaned on the railing, silhouetted in the soft orange glow from the back porch light. "I've been thinking about the video." I looked up. "She didn't even knock," he said. "She just came in like she owned it." "She didn't." He nodded, face unreadable. "Are you going to show it?" "Not yet, but soon." "Good." Just that one word. Not afraid, not angry, just sure. And I realized maybe this was the moment he stopped feeling helpless. Back inside, I emailed the HOA board requesting copies of the last 3 vote records concerning property citations. It was a procedural move, one Karen would expect from someone trying to be difficult. But all I needed was silence. No reply would say more than any letter. The reply never came. 3 days passed. No email, no vote records, nothing but silence. That silence was everything I needed. Because under HOA bylaws, specifically Laurel Grove's revised charter from 2018, any citation or enforcement action requiring structural removal had to be backed by a majority board vote, with documentation. If there had been a vote, they'd have sent me the minutes. If they didn't send them, it meant they didn't exist. That meant Karen's demolition threat wasn't just aggressive, it was unauthorized. But I needed to be sure, and for that, I had to get close to the one place Karen thought I'd never walk into, the HOA clubhouse. Saturday morning, I cleaned up, grabbed a clipboard of my own, and walked straight through the front doors during open hours. The receptionist, some kid fresh out of college, clearly not part of the drama, barely looked up as I signed the guest log. I wandered past the front desk like I belonged there. The key was confidence. Most people forget that bureaucracy isn't built on rules. It's built on fear of breaking them. The meeting rooms were locked, but one bulletin board sat outside the conference suite, pinned with the last 3 agendas. I snapped pictures of all of them. Nothing, no mention of my property, no votes about elevated structures, nothing since the spring meeting about pool chemicals and street parking. So either the board wasn't involved, or Karen was filing citations without their knowledge. As I stepped back into the hallway, I heard it. A voice, low, annoyed, just around the corner. "She's going to bury us in lawsuits if she keeps pushing like this." It was Natalie. Another voice followed, male, older, probably Leonard from finance. "You want to stop her? Call a vote. That's your job." "She won't let it on the agenda." "She doesn't run the board." A scoff. "Tell her that." I moved quietly to the exit, heart pounding. I didn't need to eavesdrop more. I had what I came for. Karen wasn't just skipping votes, she was actively suppressing them. Discovery method, accidental overhearing. By the time I stepped into the sun again, the air felt sharper, more electric. That shift I'd sensed, it was cracking wider. There were fractures behind her polished facade, voices no longer whispering. And I was going to drive a wedge right into them. Drop a like if you've ever heard someone finally say what everyone was thinking. And subscribe if you want to see how we turn pressure into results. Back home, I printed out the HOA agenda photos and highlighted every part where my treehouse was not mentioned. I opened the bylaws again, flipped to the enforcement procedure section, and attached the documentation for my own review. I was building a case, not just against the violation, but against Karen herself. Later that night, I sat down with Noah at the dining table. "Do you want to be there when this goes down?" I asked him. He looked up from his cereal. "What do you mean?" "The HOA meeting. I think it's time people saw what you recorded." He swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yeah, I do." There was no fear in his voice anymore, just certainty. The kind you get when you've waited long enough and finally see someone standing beside you. I sent an email to the board. "Dear members, I have reviewed the Laurel Grove enforcement bylaws and found no documentation supporting the citation issued against my property. I am requesting time to speak at the upcoming board meeting. I will also be submitting evidence related to unlawful entry and procedural misconduct. Regards, Ethan Mercer." No threats, just facts, delivered like a man who knew exactly what system he was dealing with and how to make it crack. That night, the treehouse lights stayed on a little longer. The wind moved softly through the oak leaves, and inside the quiet, a promise formed. If Karen thought the silence would protect her, She hadn't learned what happens when an engineer finds the weak points. The HOA meeting was 2 days away, but Karen wasn't waiting. At 8:14 a.m., I heard the clink of metal on metal. By the time I stepped outside, she was halfway through chaining a bright orange notice of enforcement sign to the trunk of the tree that supported the house Sarah and I built. The sign looked official, laminated, 2 holes punched through the top and bottom corners to keep it from curling in the wind. I stood there barefoot on the porch, watching her tug the chain tight like she was securing a crime scene. She finally noticed me. "You've ignored multiple warnings," she said, smoothing her clipboard. "This will be the final notice before fines are escalated and removal is enforced." I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at the sign. The word unsafe structure stared back at me in red. It wasn't about safety. It never had been. The structure had passed 2 separate inspections when I submitted my original plans for courtesy review years ago, and I had the engineering schematics to prove it. But to Karen, facts were irrelevant. Control was the point. I stepped down onto the grass and stopped a few feet from her. "The board never voted on this." She paused, but just for a second. "You don't have standing to interpret board procedure." "You're right," I said evenly. "But you know who does?" She looked up, just slightly. "The city building inspector." "Who I called this morning." Her jaw twitched. "I sent him the structure plans, photos, and your citation. He's reviewing it all now. I asked him one question. Would he deem this unsafe, and if so, under what code?" Karen said nothing, just turned and walked back toward her car without another word. I left the sign up. I wanted the neighborhood to see it, wanted them to understand what it felt like when your private grief got painted over with bold red threats. That afternoon, I went to visit Raj. He'd been watching everything from a distance, but when I showed him the sign, he didn't hesitate. "She's escalating because she's cornered," he said. "Typical tactic. Rattle you, hope you'll fold." "She picked the wrong house." He sipped his tea and gave a small nod. "You ready for what happens when this goes public?" "I am." "You know it's going to shake people. She's held them quiet for a long time." "I don't need them all to speak. Just one." Raj smiled. "And you have her." That was the part that had been keeping me up at night. Natalie hadn't officially said anything. No emails, no text, no line in the sand. But the pressure was building. And when systems crack, it's always at the seams, right where the silence thins. Drop a like if you've ever dealt with someone who doubles down when they know they're wrong, and hit subscribe to see how we flip this from warning sign to public reckoning. That evening, Noah climbed up into the treehouse again. I followed a few minutes later and sat beside him on the platform Sarah and I had measured together 3 years ago. He pointed to the sign chained to the trunk. "She's trying to scare us." "She thinks she can." He turned to me. "Are we going to lose it?" "No," I said, "but we're going to make her think she already has." His smile was quiet, but it was there. I had everything I needed except one final piece. Someone on the inside who was ready to admit what had really been going on. Natalie was the seam. And if she didn't come forward by the time the board met, I was prepared to make that silence scream. I spent the rest of the night printing out copies of every citation that had hit our street in the past month. I whined, cross-referenced timestamps, gathered images, formatted the board meeting packet like it was going to court, because in a way, it was. People think power comes from loud voices and rules, but real power, it comes from knowing the system better than the people trying to weaponize it. If you've ever watched someone try to scare their way into control and felt that fire rise in your chest, you already know what's coming. Karen chained up that sign thinking it would end the fight, but she just triggered the turning point. Drop a comment if you've ever faced down a bully in your own neighborhood, and hit subscribe to see what happens when someone from inside her own board finally speaks up. I didn't have to wait until the HOA meeting to find out which way Natalie would fall. She came to me. It was just past 9, the night before the meeting, when I heard the knock. Not on the front door, on the side gate. Soft, deliberate. Like she didn't want anyone to see her car parked in my driveway. I stepped out, heart already knowing. She stood there in a gray hoodie, no clipboard, no board member posture. Just tired eyes and a folder clutched to her chest, like it weighed more than it should have. "She's forcing it through," Natalie said, skipping hello. She added it to the meeting agenda without board review. She's calling for emergency enforcement. She's hoping no one questions it, I said, opening the gate wider. Natalie stepped inside, scanned the yard like it was sacred ground. Her eyes paused on the treehouse, the sign, the chain still wrapped tight around the oak. She didn't have the authority, she murmured. I waited. Then, with a breath like she'd been holding it for months, she handed me the folder. Internal memos, board emails, drafted citations. Half of them were never reviewed. She's been using her title as blanket permission. We never approved the demolition order. I opened the folder slowly. Her signature was missing on nearly all of them. So were the others. Just Karen's, repeated, stamped on every fine, every threat. This is everything, I said. Natalie nodded, but she wasn't proud. I let it happen. I didn't fight hard enough. You're fighting now. She swallowed hard. She's going to come after me when this blows up. She can try. We moved to the porch. Noah was in the treehouse, lights dim, but I knew he was listening. He always did when things got quiet. Natalie sat on the steps, fingers woven tight in her lap. I joined the board because I thought I could make things better. Community gardens, senior ramp access, shared toolshed programs. But every idea died on her desk. She wanted control, I said. She wanted submission. That landed. The word didn't echo. It thudded. I looked at her. Are you willing to speak at the meeting? Natalie hesitated. Then, if I don't, what's the point of any of it? She stood, brushing dust from her jeans. I'll back your statement. I'll say everything I gave you came from me, but I want something when this is over. What? Help me fix the board when she's gone. You've got it. As she stepped off the porch, I saw her shoulders straighten, like something had uncoiled inside her. She didn't need to say more. She'd crossed the line, and she wasn't going back. Drop a like if you've ever watched someone finally choose the hard, right over the easy quiet. And hit subscribe if you're ready to see what happens when the truth is no longer behind closed doors. The rest of the night, I prepped. I scanned the documents into a secure drive, flagged the worst violations, and formatted a clean timeline. I clipped stills from the video of Karen trespassing and overlaid timestamps. I matched them to Natalie's email logs, proof backed by an insider. By 2 a.m., everything was in order. Slides for presentation, packets for the board, a USB for backup. I even printed extra handouts for the audience section. Because this wasn't just about my property anymore. It was about every gnome, gate, wreath, and flower Karen had targeted in the name of neighborhood integrity. This was the moment the silence broke. Noah padded into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. Couldn't sleep, he mumbled. You nervous? He nodded, then shook his head. Kind of, but not scared. He looked at the stack of folders on the table, then at me. You're gonna say everything tomorrow? Not just me, I said. Someone else is ready to speak too. He smiled faintly. Good, maybe it won't just be you fixing things anymore. That hit deep. I put my hand on his shoulder. It's never just been me. Not since the day we built that treehouse. He leaned into my side, and we stood there a moment in the quiet. Just long enough to remember who we were doing this for. Tomorrow, we walk into that meeting with truth in hand. And this time, we won't be the only ones. The morning of the HOA meeting, I went over the plan one last time. Natalie's folder was tucked neatly into my briefcase, backed up 3 ways: USB, cloud, hard copy. My slides were loaded onto a slim black laptop with a fresh battery, and Noah's footage had been clipped, time-stamped, and labeled Exhibit A. I wasn't dressing up for drama, just clean jeans, a button down, and the steel calm that comes from knowing exactly what's about to happen. By 9:30 a.m., I was seated in the Laurel Grove Community Center, 2 rows back from the board table. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and Lysol, typical HOA charm. A dozen folding chairs were set up for residents. 5 were already occupied. I recognized Mrs. Ruiz from the garden, Raj leaning quietly in the corner, and Mr. Patel flipping through the meeting agenda. Everyone glanced at the projector I'd set up in front. No one said a word. Karen arrived 5 minutes, late, heels sharp on tile, clipboard in hand. She didn't look at me, just nodded to the board and took her seat at the center. Natalie sat 2 chairs down from her. No eye contact. But her hands were steady. No fidgeting. That told me everything I needed. "Let's begin," Karen announced, voice brisk. Item 1, ongoing property maintenance citations. Item 2, structure violation enforcement. She barely paused, already steering it to me. The Mercer property remains in violation of elevation visibility regulations. The board has issued a final notice. "Point of order," Natalie said, clearly and firmly. Karen blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'd like to make a motion to pause enforcement proceedings until we've reviewed procedural compliance. I've submitted a packet of materials to the board members in advance. I'd also like to yield speaking time to Mr. Mercer, who's prepared to present evidence." Karen's eyes narrowed, lips parting as if to interrupt, but Leonard, the quiet finance guy, spoke next. "I second the motion." You could hear a pin drop. Karen's hand curled around her clipboard. "This is irregular. It's in the bylaws," I said calmly, stepping forward. "Section 5.1.3, any board member can request public comment time. Section 5.2.6 allows residents to submit evidence at least 24 hours before a meeting. I submitted mine 36 hours ago." I clicked the remote. Slide 1, a copy of the violation notice. Slide 2, the full agenda history, no board vote ever held. Slide 3, the trespass footage, time-stamped, with Karen's voice clearly audible. "We'll need to cut this branch too. Drop a like if you've ever waited for just the right moment to show your receipts, and subscribe if you're ready to see what happens when the board sees everything she tried to bury." Karen sat rigid, frozen. I moved to the side so the audience could see the screen. This is not just about one treehouse. This is about process, about trust, about whether a single board member can invent rules, issue fines, and cross private property lines without oversight. I handed out the board packets. Natalie stood and handed hers down too. Inside, you'll find a record of at least 9 enforcement actions carried out under Karen Wilcox's name, with no board discussion, no vote, and no signatures other than hers. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I've submitted this evidence to HOA legal counsel for review, but I'm here now to ask this board, publicly and formally, to suspend all actions related to the Mercer property until a full procedural audit is conducted. Karen opened her mouth again, but this time, the room spoke first. "He's right," said Mr. Patel from the back. "I got fined for a mailbox sticker last month. I asked who voted for it. Got no answer." "My sunflowers," Joelle added quietly. "Were they on a vote list too?" Natalie stood again. "I joined this board to help, but I let silence become complicity. I won't anymore." Karen looked cornered, lips moving but no words coming. For the first time, the clipboard stayed down on the table. The rest of the board didn't look at her. They looked at me. "I move to suspend all enforcement actions against the Mercer property," Leonard said, "pending internal review." "I second," said Natalie. All 4 hands went up. Karen didn't raise hers. But this wasn't her board anymore. This was the beginning of the shift. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was worried, but because I finally had space to think without pressure crushing my chest. The motion passed. Karen's authority, for the first time in years, had been publicly questioned and overruled. The audience had spoken. The board had listened. And now there was a gap in the armor. But winning a vote wasn't the end. It was the start of preparation. I knew how people like Karen operated. She wasn't going to step back quietly. She would regroup, deflect, paint herself as the victim of some manufactured mob. I'd seen it in corporate boardrooms, in city permitting wars. People who built their power on fear didn't crumble overnight. They fought. So the next step wasn't celebration, it was consolidation. I spent the morning documenting everything again, not just for the HOA now, but for the city. I called the code enforcement office and filed a formal request for third-party inspection. I wanted a neutral report. A real one, not a weaponized citation in a laminated sleeve. The woman on the phone, Amanda, listened carefully. "You're saying the HOA cited you for structural safety?" "Yes." "And you're a licensed structural engineer?" 15 years, stamped plans, peer-reviewed. She exhaled. "Yeah, we'll send someone, probably within the week." That was the first domino. Karen wanted to play inspection games? Fine. Let's invite professionals to the table. Back at home, I I printed out every signed HOA citation I'd collected, half-lacked board signatures. Some didn't even reference the right code section. A few were just typed notes with a digital stamp and a photo. I cataloged them in a spreadsheet, violations by type, date, board authorization, and resident. Then I drafted letters for each homeowner I'd spoken with. Nothing threatening, just a copy of the bylaw clause that required board approval and a simple question. Were you ever shown a vote record for this citation? By mid-afternoon, I'd sent out 22 emails. 8 replied that same day. All said no. Drop a like if you've ever had to do the homework just to prove someone else was bluffing. And hit subscribe if you're ready to see what happens when a community connects the dots on its own. Noah wandered in as I was assembling folders at the dining table. "What's all that for?" he asked, yawning. "Residents. Everyone who's been fined by Karen without a vote." He peeked into one. "Are you going to get her fired?" "Not fired," I said. "Removed. This isn't about revenge. It's about fixing what she broke." He nodded, eyes narrowing in that quiet, calculating way he got from Sarah. "You're making it harder for her to lie." "Exactly." That evening, I went door to door, only to the ones I knew from the garden, the block, and the last HOA cookout, back when this neighborhood felt human. I didn't lecture. I didn't demand. I just asked if they'd ever seen the actual vote that approved their fine. Most said no. A few didn't even realize they could ask. Some offered to come to the next board meeting. Others asked for copies of my folder. One neighbor, Glenn from the far cul-de-sac, handed me his violation letter and asked, "Can you show them this one too?" By sunset, I had 10 more residents ready to speak publicly. Karen wasn't facing a man with a folder anymore. She was facing a room full of people with receipts. The final preparation came from Natalie. She called just before dinner. "She knows," she said. I figured. "She's called an emergency meeting of the remaining board members, without me." "Illegal," I said. "No quorum without a full call." "I'm documenting it." "Good." "She's trying to rally support before the next general vote. She thinks she can survive it. She won't. I'll keep forwarding everything. You just keep the community close." "I will." I stepped outside that night and looked up at the treehouse. The chain was still there, rusted now at the link where Karen had locked her warning. I didn't remove it, not yet. It would stay there until the day she was voted out, like a scar that reminded everyone of what silence had allowed. If you've ever had to gather every receipt just to prove what should have been obvious, you're not alone. Karen thought isolation would keep us quiet, but now the whole neighborhood's watching, speaking, and stepping forward. Drop a comment if you've ever seen a community finally push back, and hit subscribe to see what happens when the truth walks into the room and sits at the head of the table. The morning of the vote felt different, not tense, not chaotic. Still, there's a certain silence that comes just before something shifts, like the breath before a storm breaks, or the pause before a verdict drops. That's what it felt like walking into the Laurel Grove Community Center. Natalie had sent out a formal agenda the night before, listing the board's plan to vote on an emergency audit, a temporary suspension of enforcement powers, and, at the very bottom, motion to consider removal of board chair. Wilcox? Karen didn't respond publicly. She didn't send a rebuttal, no pre-meeting statement. But the sign she posted that morning on the HOA bulletin board said plenty. Defend our community from outside agitators. Protect our standards. Outside agitators? I'd lived on this street for 6 years. At 6:45 p.m., the room filled. Not just the regulars, this time, it was standing room only. I spotted Joelle with a folder of photos, Mr. Patel with a highlighted copy of the bylaws, and Glenn from the cul-de-sac holding his original violation letter like a badge. Karen entered late. She moved briskly, head held high, not acknowledging anyone. Her signature clipboard thudded down onto the table like a gavel. She thought she still controlled the room, but her voice cracked just a little when she called the meeting to order. "We'll begin with resident concerns before moving to board business," she said. Then she looked straight at me. "Mr. Mercer, you seem eager." I didn't smile, just stood and turned to face the room. "I won't waste your time," I said. "This isn't about a treehouse. It's about process, about power, about what happens when one person uses fear and silence to control an entire neighborhood." I handed packets to the front row, copies of every email Natalie had provided, every citation issued without approval, and every name of a resident who'd been fined without due process. Then I stepped aside, and one by one, they came forward. Mr. Patel spoke first. No vote, no explanation, just a bill taped to my mailbox. Then Joel. My sunflowers. I cried when I pulled them. I thought I was the problem. Glenn, holding up his letter. I didn't even know I could question it. I do now. Natalie stood, calm, composed. I enabled this, she said, and I'm done enabling it. These citations were issued unilaterally. I reviewed them. We never discussed them. That breaks board protocol and state HOA law. Karen's face reddened, but she didn't interrupt. Until Leonard said, I move that we open the floor for an emergency vote of removal. Then her control cracked. This is slander, she snapped. You're all being manipulated. He's playing on your emotions with sentimental garbage and fake narratives. No, I said, stepping forward. I'm playing by your rules, better than you ever did. Drop a like if you've ever seen the moment a bully realizes no one's standing behind them anymore, and hit subscribe if you're ready for the final reckoning. The board fell into silence. Then Leonard cleared his throat. All in favor of removing Karen Wilcox as board chair, pending formal review and resident confirmation vote? Natalie raised her hand. So did Leonard. So did the two newest members, people Karen had assumed were on her leash. Karen didn't raise hers. She didn't speak. She sat, eyes wide, hands clutched around her clipboard as though it could protect her. The motion passed. She was suspended pending full vote. But it was already over. The room didn't erupt in cheers. It didn't need to. The silence said it all. Control had shifted. Afterward, I stepped out into the dusk air. Natalie joined me by the parking lot, her coat clutched tight. She's going to fight this, she said. She can try, but she doesn't have the neighborhood anymore. She nodded. Tomorrow, we start the audit. We fix what she broke. Noah came up beside me, eyes bright. Did we win? I looked back at the community center. The light still glowed inside, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. No, I said. We reclaimed what was already ours. Because the truth isn't loud. It's steady. And now the neighborhood was listening. They called it a confirmation vote, but everyone in that room knew what it really was. A reckoning. 2 weeks had passed since the board suspended Karen Wilcox. During that time, Natalie led the audit review, the citation freeze held, and the neighborhood changed. People talked more, asked questions, looked each other in the eye instead of down at the sidewalk. Even the gardens bloomed louder, like the silence had broken for them too. But tonight wasn't about beauty. It was about memory. I stood in the back of the Laurel Grove clubhouse, arms crossed, watching the residents file in. Noah sat beside me, legs swinging, his phone in his hand. The original video was still saved there, Karen stepping into our yard without permission, measuring what she had no right to touch. But we didn't need to play it again. Everyone had seen it now. Natalie stood at the front, behind a simple folding table. Her voice was calm, deliberate. This vote is to determine whether Karen Wilcox will be removed from the HOA board of Laurel Grove effective immediately. Every homeowner present may vote once. Absentee ballots have been collected. Karen sat off to the side. She hadn't resigned. Of course she hadn't. Her hair was neat, her blazer pressed, her clipboard tucked on her lap like she still had power in it. But her lips were pressed so tight the color had drained from them. She didn't look at me. She hadn't since the last meeting. I didn't need her to. The first to vote was Joelle, slipping her ballot into the box with a small nod to Natalie. Then Mr. Patel, then Raj, then the Langstons, who'd once paid $100 in fines over a handmade holiday wreath. One after another, people stepped up. Some quiet, some glancing toward Karen. Most didn't. When it was my turn, I held the ballot in my palm for a moment before marking the box beside "Remove from board." Yes. It wasn't spite. It was restoration. Karen had weaponized silence, but we'd used it to build something else. When everyone finished, Natalie and Leonard tallied the results aloud, with a witness from the county clerk's office, a small woman in glasses who carried herself like a stone wall. Final count? 78, yes, 9, no, 3, invalid. Natalie didn't smile, but her voice didn't waver. By majority vote, Karen Wilcox is removed from the Laurel Grove HOA board, effective immediately. The room didn't cheer. No clapping. Just a collective exhale, quiet, real, undeniable. Karen stood slowly. She said nothing. She didn't yell, didn't argue. She just gripped her clipboard and walked out the front doors. But it wasn't a victory walk. It was retreat. Natalie cleared her throat. We'll now move to nominate interim leadership and form a resident advisory group to propose revisions to our enforcement guidelines. I stayed in the back. I didn't want a seat at the table. I just wanted the table reset. After the meeting, people lingered outside, shared muffins someone brought, talked about paint colors and barbecue nights. Kids ran barefoot on the grass, laughing under the porch lights. Noah tugged my sleeve. She's really gone? Her vote is, I said. She's just a neighbor now, no more clipboard. He grinned. Can we take the sign down now? The one on the tree? He nodded. We drove home under a quiet sky. The treehouse stood steady in the moonlight, the orange warning sign still chained to the base of the oak. Noah ran ahead. With one hand, he yanked the chain free, let it fall into the grass. The sign crumpled where it landed. The next morning, I found Noah asleep in the treehouse. He'd left the rope ladder dangling, the old blanket bunch beneath him like a bird's nest. For a second, I just stood under the oak and listened to the wind move through the beams. Soft, clean, no rustle of chain anymore. The warning sign was gone. So was the threat. But I didn't wake him. He needed that sleep. The kind you only get when you know the world finally stopped trying to knock you down. Inside, the kitchen felt warmer than usual. No alarms, no rush. Just sunlight through the window, bouncing off the table where my folders used to sit. Those stacks of violation letters, code sections, and photo evidence were gone now. Burned, number filed, stored, backed up, but no longer needed. Natalie sent a group email that morning. Simple. Director, subject, board ratification, complete message, enforcement review. Task force begins next week. We'd love your input. That was it. No HOA slogans, no signatures, no veiled threats, just a neighbor reaching out. The community center buzzed that afternoon, not with tension, this time with planning. Lawn chairs replaced folding chairs. Clipboards were filled with petitions for gardening space expansions, shared tool storage, and a new spring festival. Sarah's idea from years ago, dusted off and finally being heard. I didn't speak much, I listened, and when people asked if I'd run for the board, I shook my head with a smile. Number. I'm not looking to control anything, I said. I just wanted to live here without fear. Natalie laughed at that. You do realize that's exactly the kind of person we need on it, right? I told her I'd think about it. Truth was, I already had. But I wasn't ready to lead. I'd led enough by showing what happens when you hold the line. Quietly, firmly, with receipts in one hand and your dignity in the other. Noah came downstairs mid-afternoon, hair a mess, socks mismatched. We're still having that treehouse party? We are, I said, and you're in charge of snacks. His grin was pure relief. Later, when neighbors gathered beneath the oak, they didn't just come for celebration. They came to reclaim the space that had been taken from them. Kids ran up and down the ladder. Joelle brought cupcakes with sunflower toppers. Mr. Patel handed out tiny paper flags. Even Raj showed up with a speaker and played soft jazz under the branches. Someone, probably Glenn, taped a new sign to the tree trunk. Handwritten, crooked, beautiful. Protected by the people who live here. No more clipboards, no more fear. The swing Sarah and I had built creaked as a new kid climbed in. His mom whispered thanks to me like it was a confession. We thought we had to accept it, like, that's just how HOAs are. They don't have to be, I said, but they will be if no one speaks up. She nodded slowly, like that thought had never occurred to her before. The sun dipped lower, staining the lawn gold. I caught Natalie watching from the porch, arms crossed, face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen before. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. That night, after the chairs were packed up and the cupcakes picked clean, Noah and I stood by the tree one last time. He looked up at it, eyes soft. Think she'd be proud? I didn't answer right away. I looked up too, watched the branches sway under stars. She helped build it, I said. But I think she'd be even prouder that we didn't let anyone tear it down. He didn't say anything, just stepped forward, laid his hand on the bark, and smiled. We didn't win with rage. We won by remembering who we are when we stop being afraid. Because dignity doesn't yell, it stands. And justice doesn't need permission. You can't protect a neighborhood by controlling it, but you can protect it by reminding people it's theirs. If this story reminded you of your own HOA battle, or if you've ever felt silenced by someone with a clipboard and a title, drop your story below. Where are you watching from? You're not alone. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit subscribe. We've got more stories that prove dignity always fights back.